I want to thank Matt and the entire MacDevOps crew for inviting me back. I had such a great time last year, and this year has continued that trend. We're going to try to do a little bit of background and slides, and we're also going to do an interactive session. So my GitHub link there, if you want, you can go and get started on that part. There's instructions in the README on what we'll be doing. One word of warning, if you start poking around and doing things that aren't in the README, you're going to want to turn your sound down. So I'm going to talk about open source. And I want to be clear that Git or GitHub is not synonymous with open source. There are other tools such as Bitbucket and GitLab. Git is open source. You can roll your own servers. You can share files through email. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to talk about Git and GitHub because that'll make it easier for us to focus. So before we get started, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the origins of open source and some of the history. In the early days, it was a shared collaboration between academia, government, and private corporations. Back in the 50s and 60s, vendors would release the entire source code with their operating systems and hardware devices as well. In the 60s, ARPANET, with the request for comments, started standardizing methods for collaborating on code. And that led, to the build-out of the communications protocols that created the internet. In the 70s, AT&T and other vendors would distribute Unix as free software. However, they started to restrict what you were able to do with that software through the use of copyright and licensing. In the 70s and 80s, vendors started charging for their operating systems. And because of that, they started imposing legal restrictions on what you could do and how you could modify or access the source code to their products through copyright, trademarks, software licensing. And additionally, version control systems such as CPS started to be used to develop these cross-collaboration projects. But the 80s also saw the rise of online sharing and collaboration of software. Hobbyists would make modifications and share those mods on BBSs. In the 90s, there was a rise of open source operating systems like Linux and FreeBSD and the other BSD variants. Open source itself was a term that was coined in the 90s at the Open Source Summit, which they changed the name of during the summit. I think it was called the Freeware Summit or something. And through community involvement, they came up with this idea of open source. And with the debut of Git for the development of Linux, source sharing and collaboration kind of came into the mainstream and started taking off. But you might be asking yourself, what does this mean for us? We're at MacDevOps. We're all MacAdmins. What was Apple doing to contribute to the open source community? Not too much. This is a quote that I heard hundreds of times at WWDCs in the 2000s. The Apple and open have never really been words that flow well together. But to be fair, lately they've been doing a lot more to open source some of their stuff. They do, OS X is based on BSD. And they have a page dedicated to the open source components of the OS. There's a community effort to track changes through all these open source components of the OS at that GitHub link, the AOSM. I think it's actually called like the unofficial fruit something or other. And with components of WebKit and lately with Swift, Apple is certainly making more strides to provide some of their core technology as open source. But for sysadmins, it's great that they're open sourcing their programming language, but what do they do for us? This is their document on BSDP, written in I think 2002, and it's available as a Word document on Apple's site. So they're not, they haven't really been helpful for us in putting out their stuff. So for the most part, we're left to our own devices, quite literally. And that's fine. The MacAdmin community has been great about sharing resources. There's always been mailing lists like Mac Enterprise. Apple does have their kind of quasi-sponsored listserv list, the installer dev and launchd and whatnot. There's been the Mac Windows site, which was great for the last decade and a half of trying to integrate your Macs into Windows environments. The Apple certification books through PeachPit and Apress have been a great resource, and they continue to be a great resource. Those 10.5 books for the only certification I've ever done are still useful. I still go and use those as a resource when I'm doing things. The community has also provided information through sites like AFP 548, other blogs written by community members. And really this Apple admin community has fostered a pretty great sense of sharing and collaboration. In the early days of OS X, there were some applications that would be shared on mailing lists, whispered about in halls, that sort of thing. A couple of examples: FS Eventor, NetRestore, Keychain Minder. These were very useful tools that were provided as free to all of us to be able to help us do our jobs. Other examples like Carbon Copy Cloner and AD Passmon have also been out there over the years. But as GitHub started to take hold and push Git into the mainstream, we also started seeing the sharing of scripts as open source to the MacAdmin community. An early example is the instaDMG project, which is a precursor to AutoDMG, or I know I'm supposed to call it AutoDamage, but that means we have to retroactively go back and call this instaDamage. And this had a great impact. It had a big impact on me. I was able to take this back from wherever they talked about it at a WWDC or a Mac IT conference, and go back, and I was immediately able to start testing iteratively against each release of OS X, and that was mind-blowing at the time. Since then, there's been an explosion of code sharing amongst our community. AutoDMG, AutoDamage, like I mentioned, Monkey, BSDPy, Imager are some examples of some really complex and great tools that have been created by community members and collaborated within the community as well. Also, some companies sponsor tools in the open source, like Google and Facebook. And what's great about that is, those of us who don't have those engineering resources can take advantage of the work that they do with the engineering resources that a company like Google and Facebook has. And so, their products are being vetted internally against a large number of machines and a large engineering team. And so you can take that and modify it and make it work in your own environment. Code isn't the only thing that has seen a rise. Blogs are a big thing in our community. Charles Edge, Rich Troughton, the AFP 548, Greg Nagel have had these really good system administration blogs going on forever and sharing information with the community. Gists are a new thing in GitHub, and Mike Lynn's GitHub gist page is kind of a explosion of madness. If you think that you haven't solved a problem, just mention it to him in Slack on the sly. A couple hours later, he'll have some crazy C-types Python code that does exactly what you need. And he posts them all into these gists. So that's just a little bit about the history of open source. So I want to talk a little bit about GitHub before we get into this project, and hopefully some of you have already started there. The first topic, I just want to cover a few high-level things about sharing code. Communication is big. Releasing source code on GitHub, you can think of it as starting a conversation. And as any conversation, it's a two-way street. And so you want that feedback from your peers in the community. And you want them to look at what you're doing, and they'll have ideas about how to fix or add to what you're trying to do. One way to communicate on GitHub is to open an issue. It's similar to opening a bug report on Apple, so the same rules kind of apply loosely. You want to be clear and concise about what you're trying to solve. Give them repeatable steps. Include the system details so they can try to recreate the problem. And check in the previous issues to see if your bug or feature request has been mentioned before. This is an example of a project that I released on GitHub, and within hours, Per Olofsson pointed out that I was doing a whole host of really stupid things. I was including third-party modules in my Python, and I'm an idiot. I thought it was all just there, but at some point I had installed this stuff. And he also followed up with a pull request and information that taught me that I could have solved those problems in the same way by using the standard library in OS X's Python. So the old saying, 2 minds are better than 1. If you extrapolate that out to n number of minds on GitHub, you can start to see how these projects will just explode in usability. Another high-level operation in GitHub is collaborating. And one thing you can do to collaborate with somebody is to submit a pull request. Basically, it's just taking somebody's code, adding your own features, coming up with ideas, and then giving it back to them. And as part of that conversation, you're basically asking them to approve what you're adding, and then they can add it back in and thread it into their own project. And again, you want to be clear and concise, and you want to try to match the style of their project. So if they do comments in a very specific way, if they use 2 spaces rather than 4, then you want to make sure that you do the same thing. And good etiquette is to test your own code and to make sure that you're updating documents if your changes affect any of the previous documentation. So make sure you look at the README, you look at the wikis, and make sure everything still makes sense. And if there's interest in the community, you'll start to find that they will start solving these problems for you, whether you know that those problems exist or not. And this is a great example recently where Graham posted a release of Imager, and you can see his excitement here that he didn't do any of the work. It was all community-driven, which is fantastic. And it just goes to show how useful this project is to the community in general, that people are looking at it, picking it apart, trying to find out where it makes sense to update and make changes that work in their own environment. Attribution is another kind of fun part of GitHub. You can go back and look at some things that you have contributed to others. This is something that I'm ridiculously proud of. I submitted 8 lines of Go code to Packer, and it only took 6 hours to figure this out. I did this because Packer's VMware VMX provider was not working with Fusion's SATA disk type. And so, I opened an issue, and then I went and just kind of dug around and tried to find out where that was happening in the product itself. And you can use git blame to attribute who makes changes to certain lines within a project as well. Sharing is the last high-level concept. And sharing in GitHub is easy. You just create a project. It's as simple as that. And it's not confined to just code or scripts or software. You can volunteer your time by answering questions, support questions on IRC and Slack. You can write documentation. You can write tests. You can run tests. You can build automated Jenkins testing environments like Tim does, because he's crazy. But the spirit of community here is great in GitHub, and it inspires people to help each other and try to build on top of what others have done. Speaking of Tim, this is a fun list of Python MacAdmin tools that have been shared in GitHub. And it's specifically for Python, just for general interest. And so if you're looking to try to learn Python, or if you're continuing down that road to build Python scripts, this is a great resource to look through. You can find things that kind of pique your interest, look at what they're doing, and maybe you'll come up with an idea on how to improve those products and make the scripts better, and then you can start contributing yourself. And the idea here is just, it's community-based. And finally, promote your own work. It's kind of fun to get that feedback from others when you say you've built something, and somebody comes back and says that they're using it, or they've enjoyed it, or it's inspired them to do something else. So my advice is just go out there and tell your story. A couple of little things to follow up with. You're going to want to allow for the fair use of your software in your code. So you're going to want to pick a license. And one thing you can do is just look at what other people in the community are using for licenses and kind of go with that. There's a site called choosealicense.com, I think. And it lays out the differences between the different types of open source software licenses. So choose what's appropriate for you. If you don't have a license, then you're basically leaving it ambiguous as to whether anybody can use or modify or take your code. And the last thing here is Robbie Russell, who is a maintainer of a large popular open source project called MDOYVR16, wrote a Medium post talking about his reflections on being a maintainer of a large open source project and some of the issues that he's had and how he's overcome that stuff. And as part of that post, he has what he calls the 8 considerations for your open source project. And I listed out a few here that I wanted to point out. Don't make it perfect. You're never going to please your own mind. You're always going to be twiddling. Sometimes it's better just to put something out there, and then again, you get that hive mind. Somebody else will come in and say, oh yeah, this is how you can solve that other problem that you're trying to do, or this is a way that you can make it better. The documentation is huge. I'm terrible at documentation, and sometimes it feels like physical labor. You get a headache when you write documentation, but it's important, and it's not only important for sharing, but I find that when I do write docs, I always find things that I need to go back and fix or make better, or something triggers in my head that says, oh, right, this is how you should be doing that. And also with documentation, I do find it's good to go back every few weeks, every few months, and revisit the docs. Go through them, make sure that if you're doing a step-by-step process, that it still makes sense to you. Because if it's not going to make sense to you now, it's not going to make sense to your customers as well. And don't forget to have fun. This is the spirit of sharing. We're all in this together. Don't be curmudgeonly about it. That's it for the slides. So has anybody gone and looked at the instructions for the project? Let me bring this up. Does anybody have any questions before we start here? Yeah.
Earlier that said they didn't want to do a question, they just wanted to make a statement. So I'm just going to follow that person. The way I like to think about this stuff in terms of documentation and just code and commenting and things like that is be kind to your future self. It's not necessarily about your customers all the time, but the person that touches your code 6 months from now will possibly be you. And what you thought was innovative and terse and brilliant now is going to be something you're going to curse your past self later.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the earlier session kind of walked through how to use Git on the command line. If you go to this site, if you go to this page, you can fork the project over here on the right. And what that does is it creates a clone, or it creates a copy of that project in your own GitHub repo. And then you can get the URL to clone that down to your local system from the button over here on the right, which you can use in terminal with the git command. So is anybody, I see a lot of heads down. And anybody who already is a master at this, please help your neighbors if they're trying this out. Has everybody gotten to this point where they forked and cloned? Man, you guys are tired. In terminal, you can use git clone command and paste in that URL that you had. You can use the HTTP URL if you don't have SSH set up for GitHub as well. And then once you do that, just change directories into the project directory itself. And those are the files that are listed in there. It gets better, trust me. How are we doing? Everybody wants coffee?
Does anyone need help?
I'm going to make you
Raise
sit
your
here.
hand. Raise your hand if you need help, anyone?
We run all these scripts as root, right?
Yes. Yeah, run it all as root. And send your bitcoins to me.
That doesn't work right now.
So once you get into that list, you're going to want to create a branch, a feature branch, and you can name it whatever you want. In this example, I just named it after myself. And it'll create a new branch and move you into that working directory, which is basically the same directory that you're in right now. And then the only thing I'm asking you to do here interactively is to run this C2C script. And you probably have guessed already what we're doing. We're trying to do a little MadLib situation here. So it's going to ask you for all these words to enter.
You might have to remind people what verbs are, or nouns, or plural nouns, subject, verb,
right,
object.
Yeah, and remember, we're in Canada, so you need the spellings, the OU and all that stuff.
Ouch.
And we'll give this a few minutes for everybody to break out their thesaurus. Alistair's so into it, he has 2 machines running.
Need more power.
Yeah. Once you get through this part, you add all of the files into your working directory with a git add, and then the dot just says git add everything within that directory. And you can run git status, and it'll show what files have been added to the repo. And then you make a commit. With the -m, you can just give it a one-liner info on what you're doing. How's everyone doing? See a lot of tired faces. And then finally, you push your feature branch back up to your own GitHub repo. And what this does is it triggers something on GitHub that then allows you in the next step to do a one-click pull request against the original project. And you do that with the git push origin and then give it the name of your branch. And then back on GitHub, you click the button to create a pull request. And I think it prompts you to compare and submit. And you click the button down here. And then you click it and wait for it to be merged. And to see if anybody.
You may have to refresh the page for it to show you.
Yeah, let's hope I'm on Wi-Fi. And bear with me a second. I'm going to mirror these again. Okay. Oh, look at that. You people. Tom Bridge. So I'm just going to look through here and make sure you're not doing anything horrible. Because that's what I would have done myself. The network is actually working. Sam. Oh boy. That would be a no. I had a few people try this out. Mike Lynn Froger on Slack was putting in Unicode characters because he knew that I'm too dumb to figure that out in Python. Thank you, Dennis. This is way better than watching paint dry, isn't it? Alistair. All right. Good job. What?
Validation. It's a small thing.
Elliot. Come on, Wi-Fi. Maddox.
Ooh, do it.
You people have never wanted coffee so badly right now.
Pull request, pull request, pull request.
Wade. Thank you, Wade. Pizza.
Really? All merge? Really?
Still, the best part, I mean, of all the amazing qualities of our friend Mac Justice, his name is Mac Justice. How awesome is that? All right. So here I'm going to do a git pull and hope that it works. And hopefully the sound will work. Well, I'll just turn it up here. Let's see what we have. Oh, some testing things.
Please rise
All right,
for our national anthem.
Mac is standing. If you're
MacDevOps.
Canadian, you need to stand up.
Our Grendel, our breakfast and furry.
Guided by voices. Anyone? No.
We helping on guard for thee.
Clayton helped out
Oh,
remotely.
Canada, we juggling computer brown.
Thank you, Dennis. You were all patriots.
Glowing spaceships in the sky. Oh my, what are we writing? Shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down.
That's horrifying.
Canada, MacBook, Mac.
Thank you, Elliot.
Book, spiders, and boats. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It's fun and games. You can do this at home. Yeah, Mike being clever, of course. Nice. We didn't even last. Oh, look at that. There you go.
God
And that's
save
it.
the
Coffee.
Queen.
We're done.